She was married very young. She did not understand marriage, love, or fear back then. She only knew that one day her parents dressed her in red, placed heavy jewelry on her thin neck, and sent her away with prayers and tears. From that day, her life stopped belonging to her. Her husband was a hard man. His anger lived in his hands, his voice, his eyes. He came home angry, left angry, and slept angry. She learned quickly that silence was safer than words. She learned how to read the sound of his footsteps, how to hide her tears before they fell, how to clean blood from her lips before anyone noticed. Years passed like long dark nights. She cooked, cleaned, gave birth, and buried her pain deep inside her chest. Sometimes she wondered if God could hear women like her, women who cried without making a sound. When he beat her, she blamed herself. Maybe the food was too salty. Maybe the house was not clean enough. Maybe she looked at him the wrong way. This was how she survived, by believing it was her fault. Her children grew up watching a broken version of love. They saw their mother flinch when a door slammed. They heard arguments through thin walls. She tried to protect them, standing between anger and innocence. Even when her body, she never left. She had nowhere to go. Society taught her that patience was a woman's greatest virtue and suffering her destiny. So she stayed. She stayed when her body ached. She stayed when her spirit felt crushed. She stayed because leaving felt more dangerous than dying slowly inside that house. When she turned 50, her hair already carried more white than black. Her hands shook not from age but from years of fear. Then one morning everything ended suddenly. Her husband collapsed. By nightfall the house was full of people, prayers, and whispers. He was gone. She did not cry the way others expected. There was shock, yes, and confusion, but also something else she could not name. Relief came quietly, wrapped in guilt. She hated herself for feeling lighter when he was lowered into the ground. That night, for the first time in decades, she slept without fear of being woken by anger. Life after him was strange. Silence felt loud. No shouting, no threats, no footsteps filled with rage. Her children were grown by then. One by one they married and left. The house that once echoed with pain became empty. People said she was lucky. Her children were settled, her responsibilities finished. But no one asked her what it felt like to finally be free and completely alone at the same time. Loneliness settled into her bones. There was no one to ask how her day was, no one to wait for. Sometimes she caught herself setting 2 plates before realizing she was alone. She spoke to the walls, to old memories, to God. She wondered who she could have been if life had been kinder. In her old age, memories returned stronger than before. She remembered the girl she once was, the dreams she never lived, the laughter she forgot how to make. Sometimes regret hurt more than the beatings ever did. But there was also strength in her survival. She had endured what many could not. She had lived. Now, as she sat by the window, she finally allowed herself to feel. To grieve not just for the man she married, but for the woman she never got to be. And in that quiet grief there was a strange peace. Because even though her life was full of pain, it was still her life. And she was still standing. This is not just her story. It is the story of many women whose voices were never heard, whose suffering was hidden behind closed doors, and whose strength was mistaken for weakness.
As the days turned into months, she began to notice small things she had never been allowed to notice before. The way sunlight touched the floor in the morning, the sound of birds she once ignored. The quiet had weight, but it also had space. Space for thoughts she had buried for decades. Sometimes neighbors came to visit. They spoke kindly, but their words felt empty. "You are strong," they said. "At least your children are settled." She smiled politely, but inside she wanted to scream. Strength was not something she had chosen. It was something forced upon her when weakness was not allowed. At night, sleep did not come easily. When she closed her eyes, memories returned without permission. The shouting, the raised hand, the nights she prayed not to wake up. Even though he was gone, his anger still lived in her mind. Freedom, she learned, does not arrive the same day fear ends. Comes slowly if it comes at all. Her children called sometimes. They were busy with their own lives, their own problems. She never complained. She never told them how lonely the house felt. She did not want to be a burden. She had spent her whole life carrying pain alone. She did not know how to share it now. One evening, while cleaning an old cupboard, she found a small cloth bag. Inside it were things from her youth: a broken bangle, an old photograph, a piece of paper with a poem she once tried to write. Her hands trembled as she touched them. She remembered a time when she liked to sing softly, when she believed life could be gentle. She sat on the floor and cried like a child, mourning the years stolen from her. Slowly, very slowly, she began to talk to herself out loud. First it felt strange, even foolish, but it helped. She told herself things no one had ever told her: that she was enough, that none of the abuse was her fault, that surviving was not shameful. She started taking short walks in the evening. The world felt different when no one was watching her every move. Sometimes she sat in a small park watching children play. Their laughter hurt, but it also healed. It reminded her that innocence still existed. There were days when sadness crushed her chest, when loneliness felt heavier than any beating she had endured. On those days, she reminded herself that pain did not win. She was still breathing, still here. In the end, her life did not become perfect. The scars never disappeared, but she learned something important very late in life. Peace does not mean happiness. Sometimes peace simply means no longer being afraid. And in that quiet, ordinary peace, she finally found something she had waited a lifetime for: herself. As time went on, she realized how invisible older women become. People stopped asking about her dreams and only asked about her health. They spoke to her slowly, as if age had taken away her understanding too. She nodded, smiled, and stayed quiet, the way she had been trained to do her entire life. Some mornings were harder than others. She would wake up with a heaviness in her chest, unsure why tears were already in her eyes. There was no one to tell her that some pain comes late, after survival is no longer needed. When you are finally safe, the body remembers everything it was forced to forget. She tried keeping herself busy. She cleaned rooms that no one used. She folded clothes that were already folded. She cooked meals that lasted for days. Busyness gave her hands something to do, but it could not silence her thoughts. Her mind often traveled back to moments she wished she had escaped, words she wished she had spoken, doors she wished she had walked through. One afternoon, she saw a young woman arguing loudly with her husband across the street. The woman's face carried fear, the same fear she once wore every day. Her heart began to race. She wanted to run over to warn her, to tell her that love should not hurt like this. But she stayed where she was. She knew how the world treats women who speak too much. That night, she cried not just for that woman, but for herself all over again. Faith became her quiet companion. She prayed, not for miracles but for understanding. She asked God why some lives are written with so much pain. No answers came, but the act of praying made her feel less alone. Sometimes she felt that God had been the only witness to her suffering all those years. Her body began to slow down. Knees hurt, hands ached, vision blurred. Yet her mind felt more awake than ever. She started telling her story to herself in pieces, like placing broken glass carefully on a table. She did not excuse the cruelty anymore. She named it for what it was: abuse, control, fear. Saying the words felt powerful. On rare visits, her children noticed changes in her. She spoke a little more. She laughed softly at small things. They thought time had healed her. They did not know that healing was not what was happening. Acceptance was. She had stopped waiting for life to give her what it never planned to give. There were moments of regret that still cut deep. She wondered if she could have protected her children better, if they carried invisible wounds because of what they witnessed. This guilt sat heavy on her heart, heavier than loneliness. But she reminded herself that she did the best she could with the strength she had. As old age wrapped around her like a quiet shawl, she no longer feared death. She feared dying without ever being understood, without anyone knowing how much courage it took just to stay alive each day. So in her thoughts, she began to speak to the world. She wanted people to know that endurance is not weakness, that staying alive in pain is sometimes the bravest act, that many women do not leave because they are trapped by fear, culture, money, and silence. In her final years, she was not happy, but she was honest with herself. And that honesty felt like a small victory. Her life had been shaped by suffering, but it had not erased her worth. And even though her story was quiet, it mattered. Because every woman who survives cruelty carries a truth the world needs to hear. That pain can break a body, but it does not always break the soul. As her days grew quieter, she began to understand how deeply silence had shaped her. Silence had been her shield, her prison, and her habit. Even when she was alone now, she still caught herself whispering, as if someone might get angry if she spoke too loudly. It took effort to remind herself that no one was there to punish her anymore. Sometimes she sat with old women from the neighborhood. They talked about aches, medicines, and children who rarely visited. But beneath those simple conversations, she sensed stories like her own. Stories never told, wounds never named. She wondered how many lives had been lived only halfway, how many hearts had learned to survive instead of live. One rainy afternoon, while watching water drip from the roof, she felt something new. Anger. Not the fear-filled anger she once knew, but a calm, steady anger for the years taken from her. For the girl she was never allowed to become. For the love she never received. She did not push it away. For the first time, she let herself feel it. And strangely, it did not destroy her. It made her feel real. She began writing small notes in an old notebook. Not for anyone else, just for herself. Short sentences, memories, questions she never dared ask before. Sometimes only one line a day, but each word felt like a breath she had been holding for decades. Her health weakened with time. There were days she could barely stand without pain. On those days, she lay quietly and thought about life. She realized she had spent so many years preparing for someone else's needs that she never learned how to care for her own heart. Now, even in weakness, she tried. A warm cup of tea, a slow walk in the sun, a kind word to herself.
At night, she sometimes dreamed of running. Not away from anything, just running freely, hair loose, feet light. She always woke with tears in her eyes, but these tears were different. They were not full of fear. They were full of longing and release. She forgave herself little by little. For staying, for being afraid, for surviving the only way she knew how. She understood now that courage does not always look loud or brave. Sometimes courage looks like waking up every day in a life you never chose and still continuing. In the last season of her life, she stopped asking why her story was written this way. She accepted that not all lives are fair, but all lives have meaning. Hers had meaning because she endured, because she loved her children, because she remained human in a world that tried to harden her. When people looked at her, they saw an old woman. They did not see the battles she fought in silence. But she knew, and that was enough. Her story did not end with happiness. It ended with truth. And sometimes truth is the greatest peace a soul can have. As the years leaned heavier on her shoulders, she noticed time no longer rushed her. Days moved slowly, almost gently, as if life itself was finally careful with her. She spent long hours remembering small details she once ignored. The smell of fresh bread, the warmth of sunlight on her hands, the sound of her own breathing in a quiet room. She often thought about love. Not the kind she was given, but the kind she deserved. A love without fear. A love that did not demand silence. She wondered what it would have felt like to be held without flinching, to speak without checking her words first. These thoughts hurt, but they also softened something inside her. They reminded her that her heart was still alive. Sometimes her grandchildren visited. They ran through the house, filling it with noise and laughter. She smiled more during those moments than she ever had in her younger years. But when they left, the silence returned even louder. Still, she preferred this silence. It did not threaten her. It did not raise its hand. Her body weakened further. Walking became slow. Stairs felt impossible. Yet her mind felt clearer than ever. She no longer judged herself by what she failed to do. She judged herself by what she survived. And that changed everything. Late at night, she spoke to the darkness as if it were listening. She told it about the night she thought she would not survive. About the prayers whispered into pillows. About the strength it took to wake up and continue. Saying these things out loud felt like releasing chains she had worn for a lifetime. There were moments she wished she could tell her younger self something. To say that the pain would not last forever. That one day the fear would end. That she would still be standing, even when everything else had fallen apart. She imagined that young girl listening, eyes full of doubt, and she felt compassion instead of anger. As her final years approached, she began giving away small things. A shawl, a cup, a photo. Not because she was preparing to leave, but because she finally understood that possessions meant nothing compared to peace. What mattered was leaving behind truth. She accepted that her life was not a story of victory in the way people like to hear. It was a story of endurance, of quiet resistance, of surviving cruelty without becoming cruel. In her last days, she was not afraid. She had already faced worse than death. She closed her eyes knowing she had carried pain without letting it destroy her humanity. And when the world eventually forgot her name, it did not matter. Because her story lived on, in every woman who stayed alive despite fear, in every silent survivor who learned too late that she was always worthy of kindness. Her life was not loud, but it was real, and that was enough. Even now, when she looked into the mirror, she sometimes did not recognize the woman staring back. The lines on her face told stories her mouth never spoke. Each wrinkle was a year of patience. Each shadow under her eyes a night she survived without sleep. She touched her face gently, not with sadness but with respect. This face had endured everything. There were moments when regret came quietly, sitting beside her like an old companion. She wondered what her life might have been if she had been educated, if she had earned her own money, if she had known she had choices. But she no longer let these thoughts punish her. She reminded herself that she lived in a time and place where women were not given maps, only rules. Sometimes she imagined speaking to young women of today. She wanted to tell them not to confuse control with love, not to mistake fear for loyalty. She wanted to tell them that silence can slowly erase a person. But her voice existed only in her thoughts. Still, those thoughts felt like prayers sent into the world. Her health failed more often now. Doctors spoke in careful tones. Medicines lined her shelf. Pain became a daily visitor. Yet even pain felt different from before. This pain did not come with insults or blame. It was just pain, honest and quiet. On difficult days, she sat near the window and let memories come and go without fighting them. She no longer ran from the past. She watched it like an old film, knowing it could not hurt her anymore. The fear had lost its power. One evening, as the sky turned soft shades of orange and gray, she felt a deep calm settle inside her. Not happiness, not sadness, acceptance. She realized she had done everything she could with what she was given. And that realization lifted a weight she had carried her entire life. She whispered a final truth to herself, something she had never been allowed to believe before. That her life mattered. That her suffering was not meaningless. That surviving was not failure. And in that quiet moment, sitting alone yet finally complete, she felt free. Not because her life had been easy, but because she had stopped judging herself for surviving it. As nights became longer and sleep more fragile, she found herself listening to her own heartbeat. It reminded her that she was still here, still alive after everything. That simple truth felt powerful. So many times in her life, she thought she would not survive the next day. Yet here she was, breathing in a quiet room, free from shouting and fear. She began to notice how her hands moved differently now. They no longer shook from terror, only from age. These hands had cooked countless meals, wiped tears, shielded her face, and held her children close. She looked at them often, realizing they had done more work than anyone would ever know. Sometimes guilt returned without warning. Guilt for feeling relieved after her husband's death. Guilt for moments when she had wished everything would just end. She learned not to fight these feelings. She let them pass through her, understanding that even dark thoughts were born from deep exhaustion, not cruelty. On certain mornings, she woke up smiling for no clear reason. The air felt lighter. The house felt like it finally belonged to her. She arranged things the way she liked. She sat where she wanted. She lived slowly on her own terms, for the first time in her life. She no longer waited for approval. Not from society. Not from family. Not from memories of a man who once controlled her world. That freedom, even so late in life, felt like a quiet miracle. As her strength faded, her spirit grew calmer. She stopped fearing judgment, stopped worrying about what people might say. She had already lived through the worst. Nothing else could truly harm her now. In her final reflections, she understood something simple and deep. Her life was not defined by the pain she endured, but by the fact that pain did not erase her compassion. She could have become bitter. She did not. She could have lost her humanity. She did not. And in that understanding she rested. Not in defeat, but in dignity. As her body weakened further, she noticed how people around her started speaking about her, as if she were already half gone. Their voices softened. Their words became careful. But inside, she felt more alive than she ever had before. Her thoughts were clear. Her memories sharp. Her heart finally honest. She spent more time thinking about forgiveness. Not forgiveness for the man who hurt her. That felt too heavy, too unfair. But forgiveness for life itself. For not giving her choices. For not protecting her when she needed it most. She understood that holding anger forever would only keep her tied to a past that was already finished. There were days when pain wrapped around her body like a tight rope. On those days, she closed her eyes and breathed slowly, reminding herself that pain had visited her many times before, and she had survived every single one. Pain no longer scared her. It only reminded her of her strength. She remembered moments of kindness that had once felt too small to matter. A neighbor who slipped her extra food. A stranger who smiled at her in the market. A teacher who once told her she was intelligent. These moments returned now, glowing softly in her memory, proving that even in a cruel life, kindness had existed. Sometimes she laughed quietly at herself. She had lived almost her entire life for others, a husband, children, society. And only at the end did she learn how to live for herself. Late, yes, but real. She began to speak less and feel more. Words were no longer necessary. Her presence felt complete. She no longer needed to explain her pain or justify her past. Her life had already spoken for her. As seasons changed, she sensed that her time was slowly closing. This realization did not bring fear. It brought relief. She felt ready, not because life had been kind, but because she had finally made peace with who she was. In her quiet moments, she imagined her life as a long, difficult road. She had walked it barefoot, wounded, exhausted, but she never stopped walking. And now, at the end of that road, she felt proud. Not loud pride, silent pride. She wished the world understood that many women like her never ask for sympathy. They only want their truth acknowledged. They want their suffering to be seen, not erased or justified. As her breathing slowed and her thoughts became gentle, one final understanding settled in her heart. She was never weak. She was never broken. She was a survivor long before anyone gave her permission to be one. And in that final peace, surrounded by silence that no longer hurt, her story rested, complete, honest, and human. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world felt paused, she often lay awake listening to the distant sounds of life continuing without her. Passing car, a dog barking far away, a call to prayer drifting softly through the air. These sounds reminded her that the world never stopped, even when her own life had once felt frozen in fear. She thought about how pain changes a person. It sharpens some people, hardens them. But in her case, it had made her gentle. She never raised her voice at anyone. She never enjoyed seeing others hurt. She knew too well how deeply pain could carve into the soul. If she could protect even one heart from breaking, she felt her life had meaning. There were moments when loneliness pressed so hard on her chest that breathing felt difficult. On those days, she hugged her pillow and whispered words she had never heard from anyone else. "You are safe now. You did enough. You can rest." Saying these words felt strange at first, but slowly they became real. She remembered the day her youngest child left home after marriage. She had stood at the door long after everyone was gone, staring at the empty road. That was the day she truly became alone. Not abandoned, just alone. And she realized then that loneliness was not the absence of people, but the absence of being truly seen. In old photo albums, she saw herself smiling in pictures taken during weddings and family gatherings. People assumed those smiles meant happiness. Only she knew they were shields, carefully worn to survive questions she could not answer honestly. Her body grew weaker, but her heart felt lighter. She no longer carried expectations. She no longer waited for apologies that would never come. She no longer hoped for a past that could not be changed. Letting go gave her a peace she never thought possible. Sometimes she imagined her life as a message carried quietly by the wind. A message for women who were still trapped in fear. A message saying that their pain was real, that their silence was not consent, that their lives mattered even if no one ever said so out loud. As the end drew closer, she did not feel regret for dying. Her only regret was how long it took her to believe she deserved peace. But even that regret softened, because she knew she had arrived here at last. In her final moments, there was no anger left inside her. Only understanding. Only calm. She closed her eyes knowing that although her life was filled with suffering, it was also filled with courage. Quiet, unseen courage that carried her through every dark night. And as her breath faded into stillness, her story did not disappear. It lived on in truth, in dignity, in every silent survivor who would one day realize, just as she did, that endurance itself is a form of strength the world should never ignore. Even after all this understanding, there were moments when her heart still felt heavy for no clear reason. She accepted those moments too. She had learned that healing is not a straight path. Some days feel light, some days feel dark, and neither means failure. They simply mean she was human. She began waking up earlier than before. Dawn became her favorite time. The world felt honest then, quiet and untouched. She made tea slowly, carefully, as if each movement mattered. No one rushed her anymore. No one shouted. No one criticized. This simple routine felt like a gift she had waited her entire life to receive. She thought often about the word home. For many years, home had been a place of fear. A place where she survived, not lived. Now, for the first time, home felt like shelter. Even though it was empty, it was safe. And safety, she realized, was the foundation of everything she was denied. Sometimes, she spoke to her late husband in her thoughts. Not with hatred, not with love, but with distance. She told him how much damage he had done. How many years he stole. How fear became part of her bones because of him. Saying these things silently felt like closing a door that had always been left open. She no longer needed closure from him. She had given it to herself. Her children noticed she had changed. She listened more calmly. She reacted less. She no longer apologized for existing. They mistook this calm for aging. They did not realize it was freedom. There were days when she felt proud of small things. Fixing a broken chair. Managing her expenses alone. Making decisions without asking permission. Things others did without thinking felt like milestones to her. Each one whispered, "You survived." She remembered the countless times she had begged God for death because life felt unbearable. Now she understood that those prayers were not about wanting to die. They were about wanting the pain to stop. And the pain had stopped slowly, quietly, without drama. As time continued, her world grew smaller but deeper. Fewer people. Fewer words. More meaning. She learned that peace does not come from having everything. Comes from no longer being afraid of losing anything. On evenings when loneliness tried to return, she placed her hand on her chest and reminded herself that she was still here. That she had already faced the worst. That nothing else had the power to break her now. Her story never became beautiful in the way movies show. There was no dramatic justice, no apology, no public recognition. But there was something far more rare. Self-respect born from survival. And as her life slowly moved toward its final chapter, she carried one truth with her, steady and unshakable. She did not waste her life. She endured it. And endurance, when chosen again and again in the face of cruelty, is its own quiet victory. She was no longer just a woman who suffered. She was a woman who remained. As the seasons changed outside her window, she felt time gently loosening its grip on her. She no longer counted days or worried about tomorrow. Each day arrived, and that was enough. She had spent a lifetime preparing for storms. Now she allowed herself to rest in calm weather. She noticed how differently she breathed now. Before, every breath carried tension, as if danger was always close. Now her breathing was slow, deep, unafraid. This simple change felt like proof that healing had reached places words never could. Sometimes she remembered the nights she hid her bruises, the lies she told to protect a man who never protected her. Instead of shame, she felt clarity. She finally understood that abuse survives because silence protects it. And although she had been silent for years, she refused to let that silence define her truth. She began giving advice in small, quiet ways. A gentle warning to a neighbor, a kind word to a tired young mother. She never told her full story, but her eyes carried wisdom. Women listened, even when she spoke softly. Pain had taught her how to recognize pain in others. Her loneliness never fully disappeared, but it changed shape. It no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like space to think, to remember, to be herself without fear. She learned to sit with loneliness instead of fighting it. Some evenings, she lit a small lamp and sat in its soft glow. Darkness no longer scared her. She had lived inside darker places and survived. Night became a friend, wrapping her in quiet instead of threat. She realized something important very late in life. She was never weak for staying. She stayed because she was trapped. Because she was taught endurance instead of escape. Because survival sometimes looks like silence. And knowing this freed her from self-blame. When memories of violence appeared, they no longer controlled her. They came, they stayed for a moment, and then they left. She was no longer living inside them. They were living inside her past. She stopped asking life for answers. Some questions do not heal when answered. They heal when released. As her strength continued to fade, she felt a deep gratitude for one simple thing. She was no longer afraid. Not of voices. Not of footsteps. Not of raised hands. Fear had ruled her life once. It no longer had permission. Her life did not end with applause or recognition. It ended with peace earned the hardest way possible, by surviving what should have destroyed her. And even in silence, even in loneliness, even in the quiet closing of her days, her existence stood as proof of something powerful. That a woman can be broken by the world, and still remain unbroken inside. As her world became quieter, she began to feel closer to herself than she ever had before. There was no one left to perform for, no role left to play. No wife, no caretaker, no silent sufferer. Just a woman sitting with her own truth, finally unafraid of it. She thought about how many times she had swallowed her words. How many times she had wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. Those words never left her. They settled deep inside and shaped her body, her posture, her voice. Now, even though she spoke little, she felt as if everything inside her had finally been said. Sometimes she imagined her life as a long night with no moon. And now, at the very end, the sky was finally lightening. Not bright, not joyful. Just gentle enough to see clearly. That clarity was worth everything. She remembered the sound of her own crying when she was young. How she pressed her mouth shut so no one would hear. Now, when tears came, she let them fall freely. Tears were no longer dangerous. They were honest. There were moments when she felt proud of her children, not because their lives were perfect, but because they had built families without fear. She hoped the cycle ended with her. She hoped her silence became their safety. Her hands rested more often now. She no longer forced herself to stay busy. Rest, she learned, was not laziness. It was recovery delayed by decades. She allowed herself to sit, to stare, to simply exist. She stopped wondering whether her life had value compared to others. Comparison had stolen enough from her already. She understood that value is not measured by happiness alone, but by resilience, by endurance, by the quiet refusal to give up. On some nights, she spoke softly to God, not asking for anything, only thanking Him for carrying her through what she could not carry alone. Faith had never removed her pain, but it had kept her alive when nothing else could. As her breathing grew slower and her body more tired, she felt no panic. She had already made peace. She had already made peace with endings. She had lived through many dreams, youth, love, fear. This was simply the last one. Her final thoughts were not of suffering, but of release, of laying down a burden she was never meant to carry so long, of rest without fear. She did not leave the world loudly. She left it the same way she lived most of her life, quietly. But this time there was dignity in the silence. And if the world never learned her name, it did not matter. Because her story became a truth written into existence itself, that even a life lived in pain can end in peace, that survival is a form of courage, and that a woman who endured everything was never weak. She was powerful in the only way she was ever allowed to be. Those final stretches of time, she began to feel lighter, as if some invisible weight was slowly being lifted from her chest. She no longer held her breath when she heard sudden noises. She no longer felt the need to explain herself to anyone. Silence was no longer something forced upon her. It was something she chose. She reflected on how fear had once controlled even the smallest parts of her life. How she walked, how she spoke, how she looked at people. Now fear had no place to sit. It knocked sometimes out of habit, but she did not open the door anymore. She realized that much of her life had been about endurance, not choice. And yet, within that endurance, she had made countless invisible choices: to protect her children, to remain kind, to not become cruel, to stay alive. These choices mattered more than anyone would ever know. Some evenings she imagined all the women like her, sitting alone in different homes, in different countries, carrying stories no one asked to hear. She felt connected to them, as if they were part of a silent family bound by survival. This thought gave her comfort. She was not alone in her pain, even if she had lived it alone. Her voice grew softer, but her presence felt stronger. People who sat near her sensed something calm, something deep. They did not know her story, but they felt her strength. Strength that did not demand attention. Strength that simply existed. She no longer chased happiness. Happiness had always felt like a foreign word to her. Instead, she welcomed calm. And calm stayed. When she thought of death now, it did not feel like loss. It felt like rest. Like finally putting down a heavy bag after walking barefoot for miles. She was tired, not weak tired, but fulfilled tired. Her life had been full of things she never chose, but the way she ended it was her own. With honesty, with acceptance, with peace. And even if no one ever told her this, even if no monument carried her name, one truth remained undeniable. She mattered. She endured. She survived. And that in itself was enough.